The morning comes cold to the Wasatch Range, the way it always does at 9,000 feet in early spring. Light filters through the spruce in pale shafts, touching snow that has survived the night, but will not survive the day. A man stands at the edge of a garden plot frost, on his breath seeds in his hand. Silas Thorne is 43 years old and has lived alone on this mountain for 15 of them. His face bears the particular weathering of high altitude and solitude lines cut deep by wind and sun, and years of speaking to no one but cattle and sky. His hands, scarred and capable, hold a small paper packet with the careful stillness of someone holding something fragile. Mountain columbine, perennial, blue. He kneels, touches the dark soil with fingers that know the language of this earth, the way it drains, the way it holds heat, the way things root or fail to root depending on care and luck and the mercy of weather. The ground is ready, has been ready for days, and still he hesitates. Behind him, the cabin sits quiet in the clearing. Smoke rises from the stone chimney. A lamp burns in the south window, though daylight has already claimed the ridge. The cabin is larger than it was a year ago. A new room extends from the east wall, its window catching morning light at an angle that suggests someone measured carefully. Someone thought about where the sun would fall and when. Silas looks back at that window. Something in his face softens just barely, the way stone softens under years of water. Then he looks down at the seeds again. Perennials do not bloom the first year. They spend their first season underground, sending roots deep into soil, making themselves part of a place before they show what they are. And for 15 years, Silas Thorne has not planted anything that requires more than one season to see flower. Has not planted anything that requires him to believe he will still be standing in this same spot, tending this same ground, when the blooms finally come. The sound of a horse approaching, hooves on packed earth, the jingle of bridle hardware, the low breath of an animal that has climbed a long trail and is glad to be home. Silas looks up. His face changes. Not dramatically, not the sudden transformation of a man surprised. Just a small shift, a barely perceptible easing around the eyes, the mouth, the particular expression of someone who has learned to let one person through walls built thick and high. We do not see who rides into the clearing. We see only Silas watching, waiting, seeds still in his palm. A voice from somewhere near, warm and familiar. You haven't planted them yet. The old-timers in Cedar Fork will tell you if you find them on the right evening with a fire going and something warm in their hands, that Silas Thorne came back to the living in the winter of 1884. They will tell you a woman arrived on his mountain by mistake and did not leave by choice. They will tell you this as if they know the inside of it. They do not know the inside of it. The inside began on a morning in January when footprints appeared in snow, and a man who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of being alone discovered that some kinds of solitude cannot be chosen. They can only be broken. Winter 1884. The day comes to the mountain the way winter days come at altitude, slowly and without fanfare. No sunrise, just a gradual lessening of dark. Silas wakes before dawn in the way of men whose bodies have learned to wake at the same hour for so many years that clocks become irrelevant. He dresses in the cold air of the cabin wool shirt and canvas pants, worn soft with use elk hide coat. dark with weather and age. The cabin is a single large room with a smaller storeroom off the back. Stone fireplace at the north end built from rocks he pulled from the mountain himself. Work table against the west wall, its surface dark and scarred from years of hard use. Traps hanging from a crossbeam in order of size. A rifle on pegs beside the door, cleaned and oiled and ready. Everything present has a function. Nothing is present for any other reason, except for one thing. On the shelf above the dry sink, set slightly apart from the tin cups and the coffee tin and the salt, sits a single ceramic cup. Pale blue, delicate from a different age and place than anything else in this room. There is no dust on it. Someone tends it, but it has not been used in a very long time. Silas does not look at the cup as he moves through his morning routine, stokes the fire that he banked carefully the night before, fills the kettle from the water barrel, sets coffee to boil. Outside, the temperature hovers near 0. Inside, the cabin is warm, because this cabin was built by a man who understood that on a mountain in winter, warmth is not luxury but necessity. He drinks his coffee standing at the window, looking out at the clearing as light begins to define the world. His cattle are in the low pasture, dark shapes against snow. The fence line is holding. The woodpile stacked against the east wall stands 8 cords deep out of the prevailing wind. Everything is in order. Everything is as it should be. He pulls on his coat and goes out to check the near pasture fence. The morning passes in the particular silence of winter mountains, not the absence of sound, but the presence of a different kind of sound. Wind in spruce, the distant crack of ice on the creek, his own boots on snow, the low breath of cattle. Silas moves through these sounds without adding to them, not because he is trying to be quiet, simply because a man who spends 15 years in country like this either learns that silence is a condition like altitude, like cold, or he does not last long enough to argue about it. Silas has long since stopped arguing. By mid-morning, he is 2 miles east on what he calls the near loop of his fence line. The temperature has not risen. If anything, it has dropped the kind of cold that has settled in for a real stay. Not a visit. A residency. He is checking a section of wire that looked weak yesterday when he sees them. Boot prints in the snow. He stops the way a man stops when something that should not be there is there anyway, completely without drama. All his attention shifting to one point. He crouches, looks at the prints properly. Small. A woman's boot, narrow heel, shorter stride than a man's. The right heel drags in 3 separate places where the snow is deeper. The gait is uneven. She has been tired or cold or hurt or all 3 together. The prints are recent. The fine, dry snow has not yet filled the edges. 2 hours, maybe less. He looks up the trail, then back down. She has stopped twice. He can read it in the snow, the small disturbances where she turned and looked back the way she came. Both times she turned around again and kept climbing. Whatever is below her is worse than the unknown above. Silas picks up his pack. He follows the tracks. He finds her 40 yards from the cabin in the shelter of a wide spruce stand where the snow is thinner. She has not made it to the door. She is sitting with her back against the widest trunk, knees pulled up, arms folded hard across her chest. A leather traveling bag sits in the snow beside her. and one gloved hand is still gripping the handle. She has decided at some point not to let go of it. Whatever else she lost on the way up this mountain, she has kept hold of that bag. Her coat is dark wool, decent quality once, but it is made for cities, not altitude. Her hat has come off somewhere back down the trail. It sits in the snow 3 feet away as if she simply stopped caring about it when other things became more urgent. Her dark hair has come loose and lies in damp strands against her face. Her face is white, not pale. White. The particular white of someone who has used everything they had and is now running on the last reserve that the body keeps for emergencies. She opens her eyes when she hears him stop in the trees, and she looks at him directly, steadily, with dark eyes that do not flinch. She does not scream. He gives her full credit for that. "Mr. Grant," she says. Her voice is rough and thin from cold and 3 weeks of hard travel, but it is level. Silas says nothing. He is still reading the situation, the way he reads every situation. All available information gathered before any decision is made. "You are Daniel Grant," she says again. Not a question this time. A statement she needs confirmed before she can let herself stop holding on quite so hard. "No," he says. "I'm Silas Thorne." Something goes out of her then. Not strength, not yet, but the extreme focused tension of a person who has been keeping themselves together across an impossible distance and has just discovered that the surface they finally reached is not the surface they were promised. "I see," she says. 2 words completely hollow. The voice of a woman doing the arithmetic very fast and finding the numbers ruinous. She reaches into her coat with the hand that is not gripping the bag, pulls out an envelope. The paper is stained and creased from weeks of handling. She holds it out to him. He takes it. He stands there in the snow between the spruce trees and reads it. A formal letter. Careful, practiced handwriting. His name at the bottom. Silas Thorne. Written in a script he would know anywhere in the world. He has not written it. He reads it a second time, slowly and completely. The letter describes a capable man living in the Utah Territory. A ranch. Hard work. Honest living. Frontier conditions. It describes a man seeking a woman of good character for the purpose of marriage and companionship. It describes a man who has paid the passage fees and is expecting her. Every word of it is a lie. Every word of it is written in the handwriting of a man Silas has known for nearly 30 years. He folds the letter, looks at the woman sitting against the tree. "I didn't write this," he says. She holds his eyes for a long moment, 3 full seconds. Then she looks away just briefly, just long enough for something to move across her face. Something she pushes back below the surface almost immediately. "I understand," she says. "I left everything," she says quietly, half to herself. "My position, my room, the last of what I had saved. The agency told me it was all arranged, that you had paid, that there was a house waiting." She stops, draws a slow breath. "I have been traveling for 23 days. Silas says nothing. There is nothing useful to say. She straightens her shoulders. He watches her do it. Watches the deliberate physical act. The small architecture of a woman rebuilding her bearing after a blow. She has done this before many times. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Thorne," she says. "I will find my way back to—" "You won't," he says. She stops. He looks northwest. The clouds above the ridge have gone the wrong shade of gray. Not the ordinary gray of winter overcast. The deeper, heavier gray of a sky that has been loading for days and has finally decided to unburden itself. He has seen that sky 100 times. He knows exactly what comes with it. "Storm moving in," he says. "It'll be here within the hour. You won't make it back to town before it hits." "I'll manage," she says. "No," he says. "You won't." He says it without cruelty, the way a man states a temperature or a trail condition. As simple fact, the temperature will drop 30 degrees before midnight. You don't know this trail in the dark. You don't know what that kind of cold does to a person who has already used up everything they had. She looks at the trail below her. She looks at the sky. He can see her calculating and the numbers coming up wrong no matter how she arranges them. "I won't impose on you," she says. "Already imposed," he says. "Nothing to be done about that now." He bends and picks up her traveling bag from the snow, turns and walks toward the cabin. He does not look back. He does not tell her to follow. He does not offer a hand or an invitation. He simply walks. Behind him, after a moment, he hears her footsteps in the snow. The cabin sits in the clearing just below the ridge, sheltered on 3 sides by old-growth timber. She stops for a moment when she sees it. Just a moment. Then she follows him inside. The first thing she notices is the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a home where someone has chosen stillness. Not the comfortable hush of a place between activity. This is something different. This is the silence of a place that has been stripped to its essential working parts and nothing more. A silence that has been there so long it has stopped being an absence and has become a presence of its own. Resident in the corners, settled into the wood, she reads the main room quickly and thoroughly, the way she has learned to read every room she has entered in her adult life. Cast iron stove in the center burning steady. Work table against the north wall dark with years of use. Its surface marked with the specific scars of a man who works with sharp tools and heavy loads. A wooden chair by the window. A bunk in the far corner. A larger armchair near the stove, worn into the precise shape of the man who sits in it. The particular compression of a single body. A single posture over a very long time. Traps hung along a crossbeam in order of size. A map tacked to the wall with iron nails. The rifle on pegs beside the door, clean and ready. No curtains, no rugs, no pictures, no books visible on the shelves. Not a single object whose purpose is beauty or comfort or memory. Everything present has a function. Nothing is present for any other reason. This is not a home. This is a working station for one man's survival. And then she sees the cup in the far corner of the shelf above the dry sink, set slightly apart from the tin cups and the coffee tin and the salt. A single ceramic cup, pale blue. A different age and origin from everything else in the room. There is no dust on it. Someone tends to it regularly, but it has clearly not been used in a very long time. It sits there, the way a kept promise sits, honored but not touched. She looks at it for one careful moment, Then she looks away and does not look at it again. Silas moves through the cabin without looking at her, stirs the stove adze, wood pumps water into the kettle, each movement connected to the next without pause. The cabin is already warm. He had banked the fire before leaving this morning the way he always does because the mountain does not forgive the man who comes back to a cold cabin in winter. "Spare room through there," he says, nodding toward the inner door. Door locks from the inside. Clean linens on the bunk. "Thank you," she says. "Stew in an hour." She goes through the door he indicated and pulls it closed behind her. The room is small and clean. A narrow bunk, a wooden chair, a single north-facing window looking into the forest, a basin and pitcher on a low table, and at the foot of the bunk a folded blanket. Heavy wool, dark green new. The fold lines are still sharp. She picks it up, feels the weight of it, sets it down. Someone bought this blanket and put it here. Not yesterday. It has been here longer than she has. It has been waiting here. She goes to the window and looks at the trees, while the sky outside moves from gray to the dark iron color of a serious storm. She stands there until Silas calls through the door that supper is ready. She comes out and sits down across from him at the rough table. The stew is simple. Beef and root vegetables and salt and nothing extra. But she has been on railroad rations for 3 weeks, carefully portioning out what she could afford, and the smell of it alone is enough to loosen something tight in her chest. She eats without speaking, with her full attention on the bowl. When she looks up, he is watching her, not with any particular expression, just with that steady, categorizing attention, the look of a man who reads the world carefully before he responds to it. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asks. "Yesterday morning," she says. "Some bread." He stands without comment and ladles more stew into her bowl. She does not thank him. There is something in the gesture that is beyond thanks, something she would disrupt by naming it. So she picks up her spoon and eats the second helping as she had eaten the first. After supper, she offers to do the dishes. He refuses. "You've been traveling for weeks," he says. "Rest." "I won't sit idle while I'm eating your food," she says. "Then don't sit idle. Go to sleep." "I'm not tired enough yet," she says. That is a lie. She is exhausted to the marrow. But the alternative is to sit still in this strange stripped-down room with this quiet, unreadable man. And she has found long ago that stillness without purpose is harder to manage than work. So she goes to the pump and basin and begins washing the bowls. Silas watches her for a moment. Then he goes to the work table and sits down with a length of leather harness that needs repair. The wind outside is building now. She can hear it through the log walls, low and sustained, beginning to do the mountain's business. The stove ticks. The lamp throws a steady amber circle across half the room and leaves the rest in shadow. It is during this silence that she notices the rope coils. They are hanging on a hook beside the door, a heavy length of braided leather, used for something in the ranch operation. She does not know exactly what, but she can see what is happening to the lower third of the braid. The fibers have worn through in a slow diagonal. Not broken, not yet, but fraying in the specific way that means failure is coming and coming at the worst possible moment in the field in the cold, when the failure will cost more than just the rope. She dries her hands, goes to her traveling bag, and finds her sewing kit, her heaviest needles and the thick linen thread she uses for canvas work and winter coat repair. She takes the rope down from the hook. "You don't have to do that," Silas says, looking up from his harness. "I know," she says. She sits down and lays the rope across her knees, studying the damage. "But this is going to fail on you. Probably in weather worse than this. I would have gotten to it. Now you won't have to." She examines the weave pattern for a moment, working out how it has been constructed, and therefore how it needs to be reinforced. The technique is unfamiliar, but the principle is the same as any repair. You have to understand the original before you can restore it. "You don't know what that is," he says. "No." She agrees, threading her needle. "But I know what a worn braid looks like, and I know how to fix one." He looks at her for a moment, then turns back to his harness. She works steadily. The wind presses against the walls. The fire holds. Outside, the first snow of the real storm begins to hit the shuttered windows in a soft, steady hiss. When she finishes, the repair is tighter than the original construction. She hangs the rope back on its hook and goes to bed without mentioning it. But in the morning, when she comes out to start the coffee, she notices that the rope has been taken down, examined and rehung at a slightly different angle. The angle of a man who has tested a repair and found it sound. The storm arrives in full before midnight. She lies in the bunk and listens to it come. First, the wind climbing in pitch and volume until it is pressing against the cabin walls with real intention. Then the snow, fine and hard, hissing against the shuttered windows. Then a deep, concussive boom from the ridge above. Not thunder. Just air and elevation doing what they do up here when they decide to. The cabin holds. It holds with the solidity of something built by a man who had thought carefully about every joint and every wall, because he knew exactly what this mountain could send at him. From the other side of the wall, she hears Silas moving through the main room. Not pacing. Not worried. Just the specific sounds of a nightly routine. The stove checked. The door tested. The shutters confirmed. She has heard him do these same checks before she fell asleep the previous night, in exactly the same order. He is counting on the predictability of the check, on the knowledge that if everything is in its proper state, the night will be manageable. She understands that impulse entirely. After a while, the sounds stop. The only things left are the storm and the slow ticking of the stove and the deep old silence of the mountain underneath everything. She pulls the green wool blanket to her chin and lies in the dark. She thinks about the forged letter in her coat pocket. She thinks about the handwriting practiced and careful and intended to deceive. Someone had spent time on that letter. Someone who knew Silas Thorne well enough to write as him convincingly. She thinks about the second envelope she carries, the one she has not shown him, the one from the return address in St. Louis that she recognized the moment it arrived at the boarding house 3 weeks ago, the morning before she left. She has not opened it. She presses it to the back of her mind and lets the storm take her into sleep. In the morning, the world has been remade in white. 3 feet of new snow. The storm has been thorough and complete the way mountain storms are up here, not interested in half measures. She stands at the window and looks out at a landscape so still and white it seems to have erased its own geography. She dresses, comes out into the main room. Silas is not there. The stove is burning. He has been up long before her and added fuel. The kettle is hot on the back plate, and there on the floor beside the stove, moved with great care from where she had left them by the door, are her boots, placed close enough to the stove to have dried and warmed through, not so close as to crack the leather. She stands and looks at her boots. She does not call out or comment. She simply picks them up warm and dry and ready, and sits in the chair nearest the stove and puts them on. The door opens and Silas comes in from his morning rounds, stomping snow from his own boots. He glances at her in his brief, functional way, checking conditions, noting status, and crosses to the kettle. "Road's gone," he says. 3 feet of new snow. The south trail won't be passable for at least 2 days. Probably 3. "All right," she says. He pours 2 cups of coffee without asking whether she wants one, sets one at her place, sits down across from her and opens a worn ledger. She wraps both hands around the cup and looks at the window. The snow outside is still and perfect and utterly indifferent to the plans of the people inside. "How long have you lived up here?" she asks. He looks up, not surprised by the question. Briefly surprised, perhaps, that someone is asking it. 15 years, he says. Alone the whole time. Yes. She nods and looks at her coffee. She does not push further. She has learned early in life that the most useful thing you can do in a new situation is listen more than you speak. People tell you what you need to know, if you give them enough quiet to fill. She drinks her coffee. 15 years. Alone. 4,000 feet above the nearest person who might notice if something went wrong. And that pale blue cup on the shelf that no one touches and no one explains. She files it all away and says nothing more. The second day finds its rhythm. Silas goes out to run the closer sections of his fence line, the loops he can complete and return from. Before the afternoon light fails, she stays in the cabin. She cleans the floor. She reorganizes the shelf above the stove, not rearranging his system, just making the existing one legible to anyone other than him. She finds a stiff hinge on the inner door and works it loose with lamp oil. She mends the last 2 items from a pile in the corner. She does all of this without announcing it. When Silas comes back in that evening, he moves through the cabin with his usual efficiency, takes off his coat, checks the stove temperature, pours water from the pump, and the pump runs freely smooth and immediate where there had been a slight catch in the mechanism the day before. He works the handle twice, looks at it, looks across the room at the woman sitting at the table with her needles and thread, and the last of his torn shirts. He says nothing for a moment. The pump was stiff, he says. It was, she says without looking up. I would have gotten to it. I know, she says. Now you won't have to. He looks at the pump for one more moment. Then he turns to the stove and pours himself coffee and says nothing else about it. The stove lesson happens near the end of that second afternoon. She has managed the fire well enough through both days. But the mountain cold works differently than anything she has dealt with before. The dry air at altitude makes the wood burn faster than it seems like it should. And there is a particular drop in temperature that comes in the late afternoon, sudden and severe, that requires a specific adjustment in the damper, or the heat will bleed off faster than the fire can replace it. She has nearly lost it once mid-afternoon of the second day. Caught it in time, but only barely. Silas shows her that evening. He comes and stands beside her at the stove and points. the size of wood for banking the long hours, the precise damper position for holding heat through a cold night, the sound the draw makes when the balance is correct. A low, steady pull, not the irregular flutter of a draft fighting itself. He explains it once completely and steps back. She listens with the full attention of a woman who understands that this is not social conversation. This is information she needs in order to be safe in this place. So she listens the way she listens to things that matter. What happens if it goes out in the night, she asks. Cold reaches you faster than you'd think, he says. At this altitude, you have maybe 2 hours before it gets dangerous. Less if the wind is running. Then I won't let it go out, she says. He looks at her with a brief, specific attention. Not warm, not cold, just precise. Fuel log is on the shelf, he says. Mark every addition with the time and the size of the piece. That way I know what the cabin used while I was out. He shows her the small tally book. Years of daily entries in the same hand, the same format. Temperature at dawn. Fuel added. Weather conditions noted. The record of a man who manages his life the way he manages his ranch, methodically, without sentiment, with everything accounted for. She picks up the book and looks at it carefully. Then she puts it back exactly where he had taken it from. All right, she says. He nods once, turns back to his work. She watches his back for a moment. The broad shoulders, the unhurried movement, the particular economy of a man who has spent years alone and has learned to rely on nothing but his own competence. She has met men like this before, self-sufficient to the point of invisibility, as if they have decided at some point that needing things is a vulnerability they cannot afford. She recognizes the shape of that decision. She has made versions of it herself. On the evening of the third day, Silas notices something about her, not the work she is doing. He has already cataloged that. What he notices is subtler and older than the mended shirts and the freed pump. He notices the way she moves through the space. She is always conscious of where he is. She always leaves him a clear path to the door. She never places herself between him and the exit without immediately stepping aside. When he comes in from outside, she moves back before he asks her to. When she sits at the table, she chooses the seat against the wall, not the center of the room. She makes herself small in the cabin without appearing to try. She eats less than what he puts in front of her. She speaks less than she clearly has thoughts worth saying. These are not the habits of shyness or deference. They are the habits of a woman who has spent years in situations where making herself less was the thing that kept her safe. He knows what that kind of survival looks like. He recognizes the marks of it the way you recognize a weather pattern you have seen before, not because you enjoy seeing it, but because you have learned to read it accurately. He does not say anything about it, but that night when he ladles the stew, he puts more in her bowl than in his own, and he watches without appearing to watch as she notices. As she looks at the fuller bowl for just a moment before picking up her spoon, she does not comment. She does not protest. She simply eats. He takes that as the beginning of something. He is not yet sure what. On the morning of the fourth day, the coffee is already made when Silas comes in from the early check. She is sitting at the table with her book, a small volume she has taken from her traveling bag, worn at the binding from long use. She looks up when he comes in. His cup is at his place, steam rising from it. He sits down, drinks his coffee, opens his ledger. About the letter, she says. He looks up. You know who wrote it, she says. You recognize the handwriting. He is quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow has stopped, and the mountain is very still. Man named Tobias Croft, he says, runs the trading post in Cedar Fork. We served together in the war. He has been on me for years to stop living the way I live. So he thought sending a woman up here would fix it. Apparently, she turns this over. He watches her think carefully, without rushing to a conclusion. He paid the placement fee himself, she says. So my money went where it was supposed to go. That's what it looks like. But he still forged your name, still sent me here on a lie. Yes. A long pause. She looks at her book without reading it. He thought he was helping you, she says. It is not an excuse. It is just an observation stated plainly. He always does, Silas says. And there is something in those 3 words, not quite anger, not quite grief, not quite forgiveness, that is older and more complicated than any of those things on its own. She sets her cup down, reaches into her coat, which is hanging by the door, pulls out a second envelope smaller than the letter, worn at the edges in the way of something carried for a long time. She turns it over in her hands. Then she presses it back into the coat pocket without opening it. She comes back to the table and sits down. Silas has watched all of this. He does not ask about the envelope. I'll need to speak with Tobias Croft, she says, when the road opens. So will I, Silas says. And after that, he looks at her across the table. She meets his eyes without flinching. After that, we figure out what comes next, he says. She nods once, picks up her book and opens it to the page she has marked with a folded corner. The mountain holds its enormous silence around them. The fire holds. That night she cannot sleep. Too many things moving in her mind. The forged letter. The Henderson envelope still unopened. The long road back to Cedar Fork and whatever comes after. She goes to the main room at 2 in the morning. Silas is at the work table. Cannot sleep either. Rifle within reach. Are you all right? He asks. Just too many things moving, she says. She sits across from him. I ran from St. Louis, she says. Thought if I got far enough the past wouldn't catch up. But it always catches up, doesn't it? He looks at her. Not always. Sometimes you get far enough that you have someone standing between you and it. Pause. You're not alone in this anymore, he says. First time he has said anything like that. The words come out rough at the edges, the way truth comes out when it has not been spoken in a long time. She looks at him. Fire burns low between them. Something shifts. Not dramatic, just present. The fever comes on the 5th night. She wakes at 3 in the morning with her teeth chattering. Bone-deep cold despite 2 blankets. Wrong heat in her face. Wrong cold everywhere else. The room tilts when she sits up. She manages to get to the stove. Manages to add fuel the right size, the right position. Though her hands shake. Manages to get back to the bunk and pull both blankets to her chin. She is still shivering when she hears Silas's boots in the main room. He comes to the storeroom door, looks in. In the dark, she cannot see his face well, but she can hear the quality of his stillness change. He crosses the room, puts his hand on her forehead. A brief, flat assessment. Then he moves. He moves with the efficiency of a man who has handled emergencies alone in remote country for 15 years and has long since decided that the time between recognizing a problem and beginning to solve it should be as short as possible. He builds the stove to its maximum safe output, moves the armchair close to it and settles her there with both blankets and the spare coat from the peg by the door. Heats water and makes a strong infusion from dried herbs he keeps on the third shelf. Yarrow and elderflower and something resinous she does not recognize. "Drink it," he says. "All of it, even if it tastes terrible." "Does it taste terrible?" she asks, her voice rough. "Yes," he says. She drinks it. It tastes terrible. He sits down in the other chair, close enough to reach her, and waits. The fever moves through her in waves over the following hours. Sometimes she is hot enough that the room seems too bright, even in lamplight. Sometimes she is cold enough that both blankets feel like paper. Sometimes she is somewhere between the two and can follow a thought in a straight line for a minute or two before it curves away from her. Silas stays. He replaces the cool cloths on her forehead with the steady attention of a man who has watched other people's conditions carefully enough for long enough to know what staying steady looks like and what deteriorating looks like, and to understand the difference. She sleeps and wakes and sleeps again. Once she wakes to find it full dark outside and the stove burning high and Silas sitting in the chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded and his eyes on the floor. On his face an expression she has not seen there before and would not be able to name precisely even if she were well. Once she thinks she hears him speaking, very quietly, not to her. She cannot catch the words. The fever breaks in the deep hours of the second night. She knows it from the sweat, the particular release of it, the sudden sense of weightlifting. She lies still for a while and lets the cabin come back into focus around her. The stove is burning low. The lamp is out. In the chair beside her in the darkness, Silas is asleep, or as close to asleep as he seems to get. His breathing slow and his body completely still. One of his hands rests on the armrest. His other hand has at some point in the hours of keeping watch come to rest on her arm, where it lies outside the blanket. He does not know. He has done it. She looks at his hand on her arm for a long time. She is very careful not to move. After a while, she turns her hand over, slowly, quietly, and places it over his, lightly, the way you place something fragile in a space that might not be ready for it. He does not wake. She lies in the recovering quiet and listens to the mountain breathe and holds on to the warmth of a hand that stayed through 2 full nights without being asked to. Outside, very faintly, the sky begins to lighten. The fire is still burning. In the morning, he is awake before she opens her eyes. He is at the stove and the kettle is on, and when she turns her head, she finds him looking at her with that flat, complete attention. "Fever broke," he says. "Yes," she says. He pours water into a cup, plain and cool, and brings it to her. "Slow," he says. She drinks slowly. He stands nearby and watches her color come back, and her eyes sharpen. And something in his face does a thing she will think about later when she has the energy to think carefully. Something that is not the face he shows to the mountain or the trail or the fence line. Something smaller and older and considerably less managed than any of that. She looks up at him. "You stayed," she says. "I did," he says. "2 nights. Give or take." She looks at him for a moment. "Thank you, Silas." It is the first time she has used his given name. He looks at the window. Outside, the mountain is doing what it does. Enormous and indifferent and still. A bird calls somewhere in the spruce above the ridge. "The storm's passing," he says. "I need to check the fence line when you're steady." "Go," she says. "I'll be fine." He does not go immediately. He stands for another moment, the particular hesitation of a man who has spent 15 years not hesitating and is now learning slowly and against the grain of everything he has built that sometimes not going is the right answer. Then he takes his coat from the peg, checks the stove one more time. "I'll be back before noon," he says. He goes out into the morning. She lies back and looks at the ceiling of the cabin, the hand-fitted logs, the chinked gaps, the crossbeam with the traps hanging in order of size, and she thinks about the quality of 2 days of being kept watch over, without a single word about obligation or debt or what it cost the keeper. She thinks about a man who has spent 15 years learning to need nothing and no one. And she thinks about how different needing nothing looks from the inside to how it looks from 2 chairs beside a stove at 3 in the morning. Outside, his boot steps move through the snow toward the tree line and then are quiet. The mountain says nothing. The fire holds. Recovery on a mountain in winter looks like this. It looks like sitting in an armchair by the stove for 2 full days while a man manages the fence line and the wood pile and the cooking without comment or complaint, setting food at your elbow at regular intervals. Not because you asked, but because it is necessary. And he is the one who understands that. It looks like asking on the 3rd day to go outside just to stand in the cold air for a few minutes. Just to remember that the world is still the size it was before the fever reduced it to the dimensions of one warm room. Silas stands in the doorway and watches her walk to the edge of the clearing and back. He does not offer his arm. He does not hover. He simply stands where she can see him if she needs to turn around and find something solid. She makes it to the edge and back without stopping, comes inside and sits down and drinks the coffee he has ready. "Tomorrow I'll check the near fence with you," she says. "You won't," he says. "Day after then." He looks at her. "We'll see." That is not no. She files it accordingly. On the 4th day after the fever broke, a sound comes that she has not heard since arriving. Not dramatic, just different. The wind has shifted, coming now from the south warmer by a few degrees, and the light through the window is brighter, more direct. The quality that means the clouds are lifting. She is at the stove when Silas comes in from the early check. She has been managing the fire since before dawn, without losing it once. The kettle is hot. He stands in the doorway and looks at the sky for a moment. Then he comes inside. "South Trail will be passable tomorrow afternoon," he says. Morning after that for certain. She pours his coffee and sets it at his place. "All right," she says. He sits down, looks at the fuel log. She has made her entries as he asked, date and time and piece size, the handwriting neat and consistent. He turns one page back to his own last entry, then forward to hers. Reads through them without expression. "You kept the fire all night," he says. "I told you I would," she says. He closes the log and sets it back on the shelf. Outside, the mountain is shifting toward thaw. The deep blue shadows of the spruce trees are sharpening in the stronger light. Somewhere far up the ridge, a bird calls once and is answered. She wraps her hands around her coffee cup and looks at the south window. She thinks about Cedar Fork. She thinks about Tobias Croft and the letter she has carried for 23 days. She thinks about the conversation that is coming, the one where things will be said that cannot be unsaid, and decisions will have to be made that she does not yet know how to make. And she thinks briefly about the second envelope in her coat pocket, the one she has not opened. The return address she recognized immediately. The timing of it arriving 3 weeks ago, the morning before she left. As if someone had known she was about to go somewhere, they could not easily reach her. She presses that thought down, one thing at a time. "Mr. Thorne," she says. He looks up. "When we go down to Cedar Fork," she says, "I'd like to come with you when you speak to Tobias Croft." He looks at her steadily. "Why?" "Because whatever was done to both of us," she says. "And I'd like to hear it explained to my face, not to yours." He holds her gaze for a long moment. Then he turns back to his ledger. "Suit yourself," he says. "It is not enthusiasm. It is not rejection. It is simply acknowledgement." A door left open. She looks back at the south window and the brightening mountain and the long road that is waiting for the snow to give way. She will be ready. The south trail opens on the afternoon of the 11th day. Not fully. Not the kind of open that invites confidence, but passable. The snow compacted enough under its own weight that horses can manage the descent without losing the trail entirely. Silas checks it at midday, comes back and says 4 words, "We can go tomorrow." She is at the table with the fuel log recording weather observations in the margin. Temperature at dawn. Cloud direction. The particular quality of morning light that Silas has explained means precipitation coming or going. She is building a vocabulary for a place she has not planned to know this well. She looks up. "What time?" "Before first light," he says. "We want to be in Cedar Fork and back before afternoon. Weather turns fast this time of year." "I'll be ready," she says. He hangs up his coat, looks at the log in her hands for a moment. "You don't need to keep doing that," he says. "I know," she says, "but it's useful to track. I've been tracking it for 15 years without help. Then you'll have 15 years plus a margin note," she says. He looks at her for a long moment with that flat, evaluating expression. She is beginning to understand is not coldness. It is simply the face of a man who is always genuinely deciding what he thinks rather than performing the reaction he is expected to have. He sits down and pours his coffee and says nothing more about the log. They leave before dawn. The trail down is slow and requires attention. The snow has frozen overnight into an irregular crust that catches the horse's feet unpredictably. Silas rides ahead on his gelding, a dark bay compact and sure-footed, and completely unimpressed by difficulty. She follows on the smaller mare he keeps for pack work, wearing his spare riding coat because her own is built for station platforms and city streets, not a mountain descent in January pre-dawn. She does not complain about the coat. She does not comment on the cold or the difficulty of the trail. She rides with both hands steady on the reins and her eyes on the path, and keeps pace without being asked to. Silas does not look back to check on her. He has established this by the first switchback. If she falls behind, he will know from the sound of her horse she is managing. He can read that from the rhythm of hoofbeats behind him, even in the dark. Cedar Fork appears below them as the sky lightens. A scatter of lamplight and wood smoke in the valley, small and orderly and entirely different in character from the country above it. She has not seen it properly on her way through 3 weeks ago. She has arrived by stage exhausted and disoriented and has seen only the necessary things. The livery. The man who gave her directions to the trail. The particular quality of light that meant she needed to start climbing before it failed. Now coming down from above in the cold, clear air. She sees it whole. A proper street. A church white-painted, its small steeple catching the first edge of daylight. A schoolhouse, general goods, a hotel with a lamp burning in the front window. The necessary geography of a working frontier town, neither charming nor ugly, simply built for the purpose of keeping people alive in difficult country. Silas rides directly to the trading post without stopping anywhere else. The front door is unlocked. A lamp burns inside. But when Silas pushes through the door, the main room is empty, the counter clean, the shelves stocked, the stove warm. On the counter, held flat by a tin of tobacco placed precisely on the upper left corner, is a sealed envelope. His name on the front in the handwriting he has spent the last 11 days trying to decide how to feel about. Silas stands and looks at it for a moment. From the back of the store, a door opens. A woman comes through, 50 years old, gray-haired and composed, with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this particular morning for a while and has decided to be practical about it. Martha Croft looks at Silas, looks at her, sets 2 cups on the counter and pours coffee into both of them from the pot she is carrying. She does not say a single word. She goes back through the door. Silas picks up the envelope, opens it and reads the letter standing at the counter. She sits on the bench along the wall with her coffee and does not watch him read. The store is very quiet. Outside, Cedar Fork is waking up. Someone's dog. A wagon somewhere on the main street. The distant sound of a hammer already at work. The ordinary music of a town that has no idea what is happening inside the trading post. Silas reads the letter once. Then he stands still for a long time, which is different from reading. She turns the coffee cup in her hands and waits. She has learned in the last 11 days that the most important thing she can give Silas Thorne is time. He is not a man who processes things quickly, in the performative sense who fills silence to demonstrate he is engaged. He processes things completely, and only then does he respond. Interrupting that would be like pulling a knot tighter when you should be loosening it. So she waits. After a while, he sets the letter down on the counter. He stands with his hands flat on the worn wood and looks at nothing in particular. Then he picks up the letter again and turns and walks to the bench and sits down beside her. and holds it out. She reads it. It is a long letter. Not what she expected. Not an apology in the conventional sense. Not the arranged, guilty words of a man who has been caught and is managing the consequences. It is something older and harder than that. Tobias Croft has written the history of a friendship the way a man writes when he believes the friendship may not survive what he has to say. He writes about the war, about the specific night in the winter of 1864, when Silas took a wound that should have killed him and did not, because Tobias sat beside him through a full night and the following day and refused to let the attending physician give up on him. About the promise he made keeping watch over his unconscious friend in the frozen dark. I won't leave you. Whatever happens, I won't leave you alone. He writes about the 15 years since Margaret Winters died, about watching Silas come down the mountain once a month for supplies and go back up again without a word more than necessary, about seeing across years a man becoming less a man and more a function, a mechanism built for surviving a country that no longer needed to be survived, because the country had stopped being the obstacle. The obstacle was something else now, and it was inside, and it was winning. He writes about not choosing randomly, about requesting to see profiles from the agency, about 5 women who had paid fees looking for new starts in the West, about choosing Ren Merrick because her record showed what Silas needed, someone with skills, 4 years in a large household managing keeping books, training staff, someone with education, references mentioning clear handwriting, excellent organization, someone who left for a reason, not dismissed. Left, a woman running from something, like you. Perhaps 2 people running could find each other and stop running. He writes, I did it wrong. I know I did it wrong. But Sam, look at her eyes when you look at her. I don't think I was wrong about the person. She reads to the last line. Then she folds the letter and holds it for a moment before giving it back. He loves you, she says, the way a person loves when they don't know what else to do. Silas takes the letter, looks at it once more. He had no right, he says. No, she agrees. What he did was wrong. You could have been seriously hurt coming up that mountain in those conditions, with no idea what you were walking into. Yes. He looks at her. There is something in his expression she has not seen before. Not quite anger. Not quite grief. Not quite the thing that lives below both of those. Something that has been held under a long time and is pressing against the surface. And you're defending him, he says. I'm not defending him, she says. I'm telling you what I see. What he did and why he did it are 2 separate things. They can both be true. He is quiet. Martha comes through the door again with more coffee and a plate of biscuits, places both on the counter and goes back without speaking. It is, she thinks, one of the more generous acts of privacy she has ever witnessed. Silas stands after a while. He picks up the letter and folds it and puts it in his coat pocket. I need to get supplies before we go back up, he says. All right, she says. She watches him move to the shelves and begin pulling down the things he came for. Rifle cartridges, salt, a block of wax for boot sealing, dried beans, moving through the familiar task with his familiar efficiency, but slower than usual. His hands are doing the work while his mind is somewhere else entirely. She picks up a biscuit and eats it and gives him the space to be somewhere else. They are halfway back up the south trail when Silas stops. She pulls her mare up behind him. He is dismounted and is crouching in the snow off the right side of the trail. And even from horseback, she can see what he is looking at. Boot prints. 2 sets. Heavy men's boots with the deep, regular tread of working gear, moving fast up a side trail that branches east toward the far end of the valley, and a third set beside them, smaller. Shorter stride, the right heel dragging slightly in the softer sections. Silas reads the 3 sets of prints for half a minute. He stands up. "Stay here," he says. "Where are you going?" "East Trail leads to the Brennan claim. Murphy homestead just past it." He checks his rifle. 3 people. 2 men moving fast. 1 being brought along. She looks at the third set of prints. At the right heel. At the spacing that says, "Hurry without willingness." "I'll come with you," she says. He looks at her. Something moves briefly in his expression. Not refusal. Not agreement. The calculation of a man deciding whether argument will cost more time than it is worth. "Stay behind me," he says, "and stay on the horse." He remounts and turns east. The Murphy homestead sits in a shallow hollow at the edge of the valley's eastern timber, sheltered from the worst of the wind but low enough to catch the heavy snowfall from the peaks above. A single-room cabin smaller than Silas's. A barn in better shape than the house. A chicken coop. 2 horses she does not recognize are tied at the hitching post outside. Silas dismounts 50 yards out and ties his horse to a lodgepole pine. She does the same. He moves to the south wall of the cabin away from the window and looks at the 2 strange horses. Then at the trail coming down from above. He goes to the front of the cabin and knocks on the door. The door opens. Cole Hatch is a man of 43 broad and weathered, with small pale eyes that have long practiced calculating how much trouble something is going to cost him. 2 other men are visible behind him in the cramped interior. And behind the stove, standing very still against the far wall with a canvas bag gripped in both hands, and the expression of someone who has been standing exactly that still for a while now, is a young woman. She is young, 20 perhaps. Brown hair escaping from a braid. Eyes that are doing what she herself did at the gate of a strange cabin, computing available options and finding very few of them. She already has her bag. She has decided before this door opened. Silas looks at Hatch. He does not look at the men behind him. He does not reach for his rifle. He simply stands there. There are men who demonstrate what they are capable of. And there are men who simply are what they are, in the way a mountain is what it is. Not threatening, not performing. Simply present in a way that changes the calculations of everyone in the room. Silas Thorne is the second kind. Has been since the war. 15 years on a mountain has only made it more so. One of the men behind Hatch says something quietly. Hatch's eyes move to him, then back to Silas. "She came here on her own," Hatch says. "She was brought here by a letter written by someone who forged a man's name," Silas says. His voice is entirely level. "Same has happened to me." A pause. "She's leaving now," Silas says. "I'd appreciate it if the door stayed open while she does." Hatch looks at him for a long moment, looks at the rifle on Silas's back. looks at the two men behind him, and appears to weigh something carefully. Then he steps to the side. The young woman moves immediately. She has been ready. She crosses the floor and comes through the door and does not look back at Cole Hatch or the men behind him. She looks at Silas once briefly assessing, then at her on the horse in the yard. She looks at her the way a woman looks at another woman in the field. Are you safe? Is this safe? She meets her eyes and nods once, small, definite. The young woman walks to her horse and stands beside it. Silas looks at Hatch one last time. "Mr. Murphy's homestead is a quarter-mile west of here," he says. "He'll be expecting no visitors today." He steps back from the door and pulls it closed. Comes to where the two women are standing. Looks at the young woman's bag, small and worn, everything she owns, and at the set of her jaw, and the determined stillness of her face. "Are you Nora Brennan?" he says. "Yes," she says. "Silas Thorne. My ranch is an hour up the mountain." He picks up her bag and ties it to the back of his saddle. "Can you ride?" "I'll manage," she says. He helps her up behind the saddle without ceremony. She grips his coat and does not speak and does not look back as they ride west, and then north, and then up the long, pale trail toward the tree line. She rides beside them on the way up and watches Nora Brennan the way she has learned to watch people who are holding themselves together across a crisis, by not watching directly, by noting the small things. The grip on Silas's coat, the way she holds herself carefully upright, as if she does not trust what will happen if she lets herself slump. The same way she gripped her traveling bag in the snow under the spruce tree. The same way she stood at a fence post outside a stranger's cabin and recited her own name because she needed to hear that she still had one. When the cabin comes into view through the trees, Silas pulls up. The lamp is already lit inside. She has left it burning that morning without thinking, the way you leave a lamp for a place you are coming back to. She notices this, the small automatic act of it. She files it away. Silas dismounts, helps Nora down, carries her bag to the door, opens the door. She comes up behind them and puts her hand on Nora's arm briefly, not taking her inside, not leading her, just present. "Come in," she says. It's warm. Nora Brennan is 20 years old and has used up everything she had about 48 hours ago, the way she used up everything she had 11 days before that on a different mountain in a different storm. She sits at the table and drinks the coffee placed in front of her and holds the cup in both hands and does not speak for a while. That is fine. The cabin is good at silence. She sits across from her. Silas has gone to tend the horses and will be back when he is back. The stove ticks. The mountain settles. After a while, Nora sets the cup down. She looks at the room, the traps, the stripped-down functional order of everything. Then she looks at her. "You came the same way," she says. "More or less," she says. "On a letter." On a letter. Nora absorbs this. "And you stayed." "I stayed." "Why?" She looks at the window. Outside, the late afternoon light is beginning to go gold in the spruce trees. The storm came the night I arrived. The road was gone. By the time the road came back, something else was happening. She pauses. I'm not entirely sure yet what it is. but it seemed like a reason to wait and find out. Nora looks at her coffee. I didn't even have the option of finding out. Hatch was... She stops, turns the cup in her hands. He wasn't what the letter said. None of them were. She folds her hands on the table. The man who wrote those letters has been doing it for at least 2 years, using real names and real addresses, sending women to people who didn't know they were coming, or to people like Hatch who knew very well. Nora's face goes still in a particular way. The stillness of someone calculating the full scope of something and not liking the numbers. How many women, she says. I don't know yet, but more than just the 2 of us. The door opens and Silas comes in, takes off his coat and hangs it, looks at the 2 women at the table and pours himself coffee and sits down at the work table. The 3 of them exist in the cabin's silence for a moment, not uncomfortably, just finding the geometry of it. 3 bodies where there had been 2, where there had been 1 for 15 years before that. You can sleep in the spare room, Silas says to Nora. She'll move her things to the, I'll take the floor, she says. Both of them look at her. It's fine, she says. I've slept on worse. You won't sleep on the floor of my cabin, Silas says. There is no argument in his voice, just the flat certainty of a man who has decided something. Then where? There's a second bunk in the storeroom. I'll clear it tonight. He stands and goes to the storeroom door. The sound of things being moved. Careful, methodical, making space where there has not been space. Nora looks at her. He's always like this. I'm still learning what always looks like, she says. But yes, I think so. That evening, after Nora has gone to the spare room and closed the door, she sits at the table with her book. The worn volume she has carried in her traveling bag. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the binding soft from years of handling. Silas is at the work table with a piece of leather and his shaping tools. He looks up and sees the book in her hands. He has noticed it before. A small volume cloth bound the kind that fits in a coat pocket. She reads it in the evenings quietly, her lips moving slightly now and then. He looks at it for a moment. Then he stands and walks across the room and picks it up from the table, gently because she has marked her place and he does not want to lose it. He turns it over and reads the cover. Poetry. A woman's name he recognizes distantly from somewhere. He opens it to the first page, reads the first 4 lines, sets it down. She is watching him with an expression that is nearly not quite amusement. The careful, controlled version of amusement that belongs to people who have learned not to show too much. You read poetry, he says. Apparently. I don't, he says. I know, she says. You picked it up anyway. He looks at the book again, picks it up once more and reads further into the first poem. His lips move slightly over a line that surprises him, sets it down again. Why do you read her? He asks. Because she's honest, she says, and because people always think she's only sad. But she's not. She's funny sometimes, and sharp. She pauses. She lost a great deal before the part of her life that most people know about. Most people do, he says. It comes out quieter than he intended. He turns back to his work table. She looks at the lamp for a moment. Then she picks up the book and resumes reading. Neither of them speaks again before bed. But Silas lies in his bunk that night and thinks about those 4 lines, about the weight in them, about how someone could write a thing that clean and that precise about loss without it breaking the sentence. He thinks about it for longer than he expects to. On the morning of the 14th day, she is in the storeroom reaching for the candlestock she has reorganized 3 days earlier when her hand touches something unexpected. Not the candles. A flat piece of cured elk hide folded and tucked between the candle boxes in the wall. She draws it out. On the hide in pencil is a drawing. A floor plan. Detailed. Precise. The work of someone who thinks in 3 dimensions and draws accurately from those thoughts. A cabin layout. This cabin recognizably, but with something added. A new section drawn in along the east wall. A room, larger than the storeroom, with a south-facing window indicated by dotted lines, and inside the drawn room a shelf along the low wall, a window seat indicated by a simple bracket, a hook beside the interior door marked with a small circle and the notation 60 inches. 60 inches from the floor, the height a woman of average build could reach without stretching. She looks at the drawing for a long time. Then she turns the hide over. On the back, in the same pencil but handwriting she does not recognize, a woman's hand, educated and clear. Someone has written for S, so he will have something worth building when I am not there to build with him. M. The ink is old. The inscription has faded slightly at the edges. Beneath it, a date. 1871. She stands in the dim storeroom with the old drawing in her hands. She understands now what she's looking at. The hook by the door at 60 inches. The pale blue cup. The south-facing window that catches the afternoon light just so. She understands that she is standing in a house that was built for a woman who never arrived. That every considered detail of this cabin's construction, every measured height and sheltered corner and carefully placed hook, is the physical record of a man who loved someone completely enough to think about where she would hang her coat, who then spent 15 years living in the evidence of that love. She puts the drawing back exactly where she found it, pushed gently to the same position. She takes the candles and goes out and closes the storeroom door. She does not mention it that evening, or the next day. But on the morning 2 days later, she comes around the south side of the cabin to bring in a stack of pelts that Silas has asked her to move before the afternoon weather comes in. And she finds him there. He is measuring. He has a length of knotted cord stretched along the east wall of the cabin, checking the run of the logs. And in his other hand is the cured elk hide she found in the storeroom. The drawing. He is comparing the east wall's existing run to the notations on the hide. He makes a mark in the snow at the corner joint, consults the drawing, makes another mark further along. He is planning the addition. From the 1871 drawing, he is still building it. She stands in the cold and looks at the marks in the snow, at the drawing in his hand, at the cabin wall being measured with the calm precision of a man who has known exactly what he wanted to build for 13 years and has simply been waiting for the conditions to allow it. She does not know what she feels standing there. It is complex in the way that things are complex when they contain both understanding and something sharper than understanding. When you can see why a person has done something and simultaneously understand that the thing, regardless of why, is going to require a conversation that neither of you is quite ready for. She picks up the pelts, goes back inside, waits 2 days, not because she needs time to decide what to say. She knows what needs to be said. From the moment she came around the cabin corner and saw the marks in the snow, she waits because she has learned in the weeks since arriving on this mountain that timing matters enormously with Silas Thorne. Say the right thing at the wrong moment, and the wall goes up and you are back to the beginning. Say it when the space is right, when the stove is settled and the work is done and the particular quality of the evening has that low, quiet weight that allows difficult things to be heard, and something different is possible. She chooses a Thursday evening in late January, 2 weeks after the fever broke. The weather has been clear for 3 days. The mountain is in one of its brief, cold, crystalline phases where the sky at night is so dense with stars it seems to press down toward the tree line. Silas has come in from an extended loop of the fence line. Good work. The cattle are holding well. He has eaten and is at the work table with a new section of harness. She is across the room with the ledger she has been keeping of weather observations and fuel usage. She goes to the storeroom, comes back with the cured elk hide, lays it on the table between them. He looks at it, does not say anything for a moment. "I found it when I was getting candles," she says. "I put it back. I wasn't going to say anything about it." She pauses. "And then I came around the south side of the cabin 2 days ago and saw you measuring the east wall." He is still looking at the drawing. "You're building the room," she says, "from the 1871 plan." "The east wall is sound," he says. "Spring is a good time to—" "Silas." He stops. She is not angry. Her voice is steady and direct. The voice she uses for things that need to be said clearly and without softening. "How long have you been planning the addition?" "A long time." "Since before I came?" "Yes." "Since 1871. A pause. "Yes." She looks at the drawing on the table, at the window seat, the measured hook, the shelf at the right height. "You've been building this cabin for a woman who has been gone for 13 years, she says, "and you are still building it." He does not deny it. "I'm not saying that to accuse you of anything," she says. "I'm saying it because I need you to hear it said out loud. Because I don't think you've heard it that way. I don't think anyone has said it to you as a plain fact. It's my cabin," he says. "Yes, it is," she says. "And it's a beautiful one. And every measured inch of it tells me the kind of man you are. The kind who thinks about how high a hook needs to be for someone else to reach it. Who faces windows south because morning light matters to people who are not you." She looks at him. "But Silas, I've been living in this cabin for 3 weeks, and I need to ask you something directly. When you look at this drawing, when you measure that wall, who are you building it for?" The fire ticks. The mountain is enormous and quiet outside. He says nothing for a long time. She waits. She is good at waiting for things that matter. "I don't know," he says finally. It comes out rough at the edges the way truth comes out when it has not been spoken in a long time. "I built this place for her. Every part of it. And when she died, I kept going because I didn't know how to stop. And after a while," he stops, looks at the drawing. After a while, the building was the only way I still knew how to. He stops again. To love her, she says. Yes. Pause. And now. He looks at the table. Now you are here, and you reach the hook without stretching. And I noticed that. And I did not know what to do with having noticed it. She is very still. So you went back to the drawing, she says. Yes. You went back to the 1871 drawing because it was something you already knew how to do. Yes. She leans forward and puts her hand flat on the hide beside the drawing, not covering it, just present. Silas, she says, I am not her. I know that. And I'm not asking you to stop loving her. I'm not asking you to stop building things that honor what you had. But there is a difference between honoring someone and building a room for a ghost while a real person is living in the same house. She pauses. And I think you know that difference. I think that is exactly why you didn't tell me about the measuring. He is very still. Because if you had told me, she says quietly, you would have had to hear it out loud, and you weren't ready to hear it. The silence that follows is the longest in her experience of this cabin's many silences. Longer than the first night of the storm. Longer than the 2 nights of the fever. The kind of silence that has a specific weight and texture. Because both people in it are waiting for the same thing to happen, and neither one is going to force it. Silas stands up, walks to the storeroom. She hears the sound of the rearranged shelf, the specific place where she found the drawing, and then the lower sound of a wooden trunk, its lid lifting. She looks at the fire. He comes back. He is carrying a photograph. She has not seen it before. She has known it existed. Everything in the cabin suggests it must. The same way the absence of curtains and rugs and pictures suggests their deliberate removal. But she has not seen it. He sets it on the table. Margaret Winters, in a nurse's uniform. A studio portrait made in the early style of the previous decade. A face that is clear and capable and holds, even in the stillness of a photograph, the quality of genuine attention. The look of someone present in the room with you rather than performing presence. She looks at her for a long moment, 30 seconds into any conversation, and she'd have the whole room, Silas says. She was the least patient person I ever met. She had no tolerance for stupidity or waste. She once dressed down a general for ordering men into weather that would cost them more than the objective was worth. A pause. Of course he backed down, she says. She would have hated this cabin, he says. She would have had curtains up in the first week, and she would have wanted a garden, and she would have told me the armchair was in the wrong position, and she would have been right about all of it. She smiles, small, genuine, not performed. She sounds formidable, she says. She was everything. He says. Simple. Complete. She looks at the photograph for another moment. Then she looks at Silas. I know, she says. He picks up the photograph, looks at it one more time directly without flinching, the way you look at something you are deciding to carry differently rather than put down. Then he stands and carries it back to the storeroom. This time she hears the trunk close. He comes back and sits down, picks up the elk hide drawing, looks at the room on the east wall, the south window, the measured hook, the shelf. Then he looks at her across the table. The window facing south is still a good idea, he says. It is, she agrees. But I'd want to know what you do with the shelf. She looks at him carefully. What do you mean? I mean if I'm going to build a room, he says, slowly as if working out the words as they come. I should know who I'm building it for, what they need, what height things should be, what the window looks at. She holds his gaze. That sounds like a different question than the one you started with tonight, she says. It is, he says. The fire holds its steady warmth. Outside, the mountain winter presses against the walls and finds them sound. The shelf, she says after a moment, should be low enough to be useful and deep enough to hold actual things, not decorative, functional. She pauses, and the window should face south and slightly west. Morning light is fine, but what you want in a room like that is the afternoon. Silas looks at the drawing, takes the pencil from his shirt pocket, and makes a small adjustment to the window notation. Why the afternoon, he says. Because morning light makes you get up and start working, she says. Afternoon light makes you sit down and stay. He looks at the adjusted notation. All right, he says, and something in the way he says it, the particular tone of a man who has made a decision and is committing to it, tells her that they have just crossed a threshold that neither of them has words for yet. But they both know it happened. The fire burns. The mountain is silent. And on the table between them, a drawing from 1871 sits beside a pencil mark made today. And the difference between those two things is the difference between building for the dead and building for the living. She picks up her book. He picks up his harness work. They sit in the quiet of two people who have said the necessary things and do not need to say them again. Outside, very faintly, the first edge of dawn begins to touch the ridge. The letter from Salt Lake City arrives 12 days later. Tobias brings it up on a Tuesday, along with a sack of flour and the week's newspapers. He has taken to coming once a week now. Not just for supply delivery, but in the gradually normalizing way of a man who is working his way back toward a friendship. He almost destroyed doing it the only way available, which is to show up consistently and be useful and say less than he wants to. Silas accepts the letter without comment, reads it that evening after supper while Nora is in the spare room and the cabin has settled into its particular quiet. The lawyer's name is Ambrose Whitfield, no relation to anyone in Cedar Fork. Useful for matters of property and testimony and the kind of documentation that territorial authorities require before moving on complaints against registered businesses. Tobias has explained the situation. The lawyer has written to say he can help with both matters, the Henderson affidavit and the agency testimony. He will need everything in writing, and there is a secondary matter. The authorities in St. Louis have begun an inquiry into the agency based on the letters already sent. Her letters, dated and specific. The lawyer says this is what moved it forward faster than usual. Silas sets the letter down, looks across the room at her. Already, she says. Your letters were specific, he says. Dated and specific. He says that is what moved it. She sets the letter down. looks at the stove for a moment. "There will be more women," she says, "who went through this, who are still dealing with it." "Yes," Silas says. "If the inquiry opens formally, they'll need to be found." "That's what inquiries do," Silas says. "They find people." She is quiet for a moment. Then she looks at him directly. "I want to write again," she says. "Not just for the legal process, to the newspapers. The St. Louis papers and the Salt Lake paper." Tobias mentioned there's a woman's advocacy organization in Denver. He said it when he was here last week. Silas looks at her. "That is a larger project than a letter," he says. "I know what it is," she says. "Will you help me?" He is quiet for a moment in the way that she now understands is not hesitation, but consideration. The genuine computation of someone who does not say yes lightly and does not say no lightly, and takes the space between them seriously. "Yes," he says. They write for 3 evenings. It is the most consecutive conversation they have yet had. Not in the sense of talking continuously, but in the sense of working toward the same thing with full attention, each contributing from their different angle. She knows what needs to be felt and understood and believed. He knows what needs to be stated and documented and impossible to dismiss. They develop a working method without discussing it. She drafts. He reads. She revises based on his specific suggestions. He will circle a phrase and say simply too much, or needs the date, or once looking at a passage about the women who had nowhere to go. This is true. Leave it exactly as it is. On the second evening, they are working on the letter to the Denver organization when she stops mid-sentence and looks up. "There's something else," she says. He waits. She pulls the Henderson letter from her folder. She has been keeping everything organized in a calfskin folder she carries in her traveling bag. The accumulated paper record of her adult life. Turns it to show him the signature at the bottom. Not the Henderson name, the lawyer's name. The man who drafted it. Alderman J. Whitfield, St. Louis, Missouri. Silas reads the name. "Different Whitfield," he says. "Common enough name." "Yes," she says. "But Tobias mentioned a Whitfield here in Cedar Fork when I was in the trading post. He said it carefully, the way you say someone's name carefully when there's more you're not saying." Silas looks at the lawyer's signature, looks at the window, sets the letter down. "James Whitfield," he says. "His family holds land in the valley below this mountain. Bought it about 13 years ago. His voice is completely level. From my family. After Margaret died." She waits. "I wasn't in a position to argue price at the time," he says. "I had decided to come up here. The land was gonna sit unused. He made an offer and I took it. Was it a fair price?" A long pause. "No," he says. "But I didn't care what it was. I didn't care about much at that point." He looks at the window. "And since then, Whitfield has done well for himself in Cedar Fork. His son went to St. Louis for law school. Came back with connections." He picks up the letter again. Looks at the signature. Alderman J. Whitfield. "The son," she says. "The son," Silas agrees. She looks at him. "The people in town who have the wrong idea about you Tobias mentioned it, that someone had spread a story, that I went up the mountain because I was shamed, Silas says. There was a version of events that went around Cedar Fork after I left, that Margaret had rejected me, that I'd come up here because I couldn't face people after. He says it without particular emotion, the flat matter-of-fact recitation of a story that has long since stopped surprising him. I knew people believed it. I never bothered to correct it. Why not? Because I was up here, he says, and they were down there, and it didn't seem to matter. It matters if someone started it deliberately, she says carefully. If someone had a reason to want you gone and discredited. Pause. Someone who bought land from a man in grief, she says, might have an interest in that man staying in grief. Staying up on the mountain, never coming back down, and asking questions about what his land was worth, and whether the price was what it should have been. The stove ticks. That is a serious thing to say, Silas says. I know it is, she says. I'm not saying it lightly. But I have spent my adult life in houses where people with money and standing did small, careful, deliberate things to keep other people in positions that suited them. I know what that looks like. I know how it moves. He is quiet for a very long time. Outside, the mountain is doing its deep night thing. The silence that is not absence, but the presence of something enormous and old and entirely uninterested in the arguments of the people sheltering at its base. I'll go down to Cedar Fork tomorrow, Silas says finally. I'll come with you, she says. This one I'll go alone. She looks at him. He is not shutting her out. She can read the difference by now. He is protecting something that needs to be handled in a particular way, by a particular person, without witnesses. All right, she says. He picks up the letter one more time, then he sets it down and goes back to the draft they have been working on. He does not say anything more about Whitfield that evening, but she notices that his handwriting on the last paragraph is slightly harder than usual. Slightly more definite, as if the pen is being used by a hand that has made up its mind about something. Silas comes back from Cedar Fork in the late afternoon of the following day. She is at the window when she hears his horse on the trail, watches him come through the tree line and cross the clearing and dismount at the post, unsaddles with his usual efficiency, takes care of the horse, comes inside, hangs his coat, pours coffee, sits down. She gives him his time. I spoke with Tobias first, he says, about the story, about where it started. He looks at his coffee. Tobias had heard the same thing I had, that Margaret rejected me, that I was too ashamed to stay. He believed the correct version because he knew the truth. But he said most of the town had heard the other one for so long it had the weight of fact. Did he know who started it? He had a suspicion. He'd always had a suspicion. Silas looks at the window. He never pushed on it because he thought it would only make things worse for me. That bringing it up would just mean more people discussing my business. He was protecting you again, she says. In his way, Silas agrees. He does not say it warmly, but not coldly either. Something in between that is more honest than either. And Whitfield, I went to see him. Silas is quiet for a moment. I told him that I knew how he bought that land. That you knew, that Tobias knew, that the lawyer in Salt Lake City was now aware of the connection between the Henderson firm and the Whitfield name. He pauses. I told him he had some time to decide what he wanted to do about that. What did he say? Nothing, which is the only correct answer in that situation. She looks at him. Was that enough? For now, Silas says. Whitfield is a careful man. He will calculate very precisely what is in his interest, and he will act accordingly. He picks up his coffee. The story about me in town will take longer. Stories do. He says it without bitterness. She nods. And then, very quietly, she reaches into her coat pocket and pulls out the second envelope, the one she has carried unopened for 5 weeks. Henderson Household Management, St. Louis, Missouri. She looks at it for a long moment. Then she opens it. The letter is 3 paragraphs long. The language is careful and formal in the way of documents designed to sound reasonable while threatening an outcome. The substance is simple. Wren Merrick is requested to sign and return the enclosed affidavit, which states that her departure from Henderson Household Service was voluntary and without incident. Failure to comply will result in legal action pertaining to certain items missing from the household inventory at the time of her departure. Items she did not take. Items she was very careful never to be alone in a room with specifically, because she understood that a day like this one was always possible. She sets the letter on the table, looks at the window. The mountain sits in its enormous white silence outside, entirely unmoved by the paperwork of St. Louis households. She sits there for a moment and lets herself be afraid. Not the wide ambient fear of the journey up the mountain, not the diffuse dread of the storm or the fever. This is the specific familiar fear of a particular household and a particular mechanism she has spent years watching operate and 2 years trying to stay ahead of. Then she folds it up, puts it in the pocket of her dress, goes back to the mending. Silas reads it an hour later. She has left it on the table. Wren Merrick, he says. That is my real name, she says. I used Ashford when I left because I knew they might try to follow. The agency correspondence was in the name Ashford. I thought that would be enough distance. She looks at the letter. The person on your ridge. They tracked it back. Someone connected both names. When did this come? 3 weeks before I arrived here. The morning before I left St. Louis. She pauses. I didn't open it then. I didn't want to know what it said until I had somewhere to be. The items they are referring to, he says. Did you take them? No. Will they be able to prove that you did? Probably not, she says. But that may not be the point. The point may simply be to create a situation where I have to return and answer for it. Where I have to be in the same room as people who have lawyers and I don't. You need a lawyer, Silas says. He stands. Tobias knows a man in Salt Lake City. Uses him for property matters. Next time I go down, I'll get the name. She looks at him. You don't have to. You were brought here by a forged letter using my name. He says. Whatever followed from that is partly my business. He picks up his coffee. I don't mean that as charity. I mean it as a simple fact. She holds his eyes for a moment. His expression is the same as it always is. Flat. Direct. Not offering more than it contains. All right, she says. That night she cannot sleep. Too many pieces moving. Boot prints on the ridge. Henderson hiring an investigator. Or Voss tracking her. Or the Whitfield connection. She does not know which, and the not knowing is worse than any single answer would be. She goes to the main room at 2 in the morning. Silas is at the work table. Cannot sleep either. Rifle within reach. "Are you all right?" he asks. "Just too many things moving," she says. She sits across from him. "I ran from St. Louis," she says. "Thought if I got far enough the past wouldn't catch up. But it always catches up, doesn't it?" He looks at her. "Not always. Sometimes you get far enough that you have someone standing between you and it." Pause. "You're not alone in this anymore, Wren." First time he has said her name like that. Soft. Definite. She looks at him. Fire burns low between them. Something shifts. Not dramatic. Just present. The next morning, there is a black horse outside the cabin, tied to the post. Expensive saddle. St. Louis make. Silas sees it from the window. Immediately awake. Grabs rifle. Goes to the door. A man on the porch. Waiting. Hands visible. No weapon drawn. But Silas recognizes the stance. The build. Dalton Voss. He moves to the door. Rifle ready but not aimed. She wakes. Comes out. "Stay inside," Silas says without turning. "Who's out there?" "Voss." Her face changes. "I'm serious. Stay inside." "No," she says. Steady. He looks at her. "You told me I wasn't alone," she says. That works both ways. Pause. He nods once, opens the door. On the porch stands Dalton Voss, 45 years old, well-dressed for the frontier. Expensive coat, calculated charm. A face Silas has not seen in 15 years. Older. Lines around the eyes, but the same. "Silas Thorne," Voss says. "Been a long time." Voss. Voss glances at her. And this must be Miss Merrick. Or does she prefer Ashford? I've lost track. She says nothing. "I don't mean offense," Voss says. "Simply business." "Get off my land," Silas says. "No need for hostility, Sam." Raises his hands. "We're brothers in arms. I just came to talk." Uses the war nickname deliberately. Reminder of the bond. "There's nothing to talk about." "I think there is," Voss says. "I hear there've been letters sent to authorities, newspapers. Miss Merrick here is a very active correspondent." He looks at her. "I respect that, truly. A woman with her convictions. But there are some facts the letters don't mention." Silas's grip on the rifle tightens. "Such as," Voss continues, "the agency provides a service. Women want to start over. Men need wives. I connect them. Sometimes the details aren't entirely accurate, but the results..." She cuts him off. "The results are women like me climbing mountains in blizzards to houses that don't exist." Or, Voss gestures at the cabin. "The result is you find a real house, with a respectable man. I mean, look around you. You're here. You're fine. Better than fine, I'd wager." Her jaw tightens. "And the other women," Voss says. "They found situations too. Perhaps not always what they expected, but Coal Hatch, Silas says. Voss stops. You sent women to Coal Hatch, women who paid the agency, and you collected money from Hatch to deliver them. I don't control what happens after the connection is made, Voss says. You traffic women, Silas says. I provide opportunities, Voss says. His tone hardens. Silence. But look, Voss says, I didn't come here to argue morality. I came to offer a deal. He reaches into his coat. Silas raises the rifle. Voss freezes. Just papers, Voss says. Relax, Sam. Slowly pulls out folded documents. A simple arrangement. Miss Merrick signs a statement saying the agency provided services as advertised, that she's satisfied with the outcome. She withdraws the letters sent to authorities. Pause. In exchange, the Henderson matter disappears completely. I have connections in St. Louis. I can make that happen. He sets the documents on the porch railing, and in addition, reaches into coat again, pulls out thick envelope, $500. Cash. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience. She looks at the money, at the documents, at Voss. No, she says. Voss is surprised. You haven't thought about it. I don't need to think. The answer is no. Miss Merrick, be practical. Henderson will drag you off this mountain. They have lawyers. They have money. What do you have, a man in a cabin? She steps forward. I have my name, she says. My real name. And I have the truth. And I have letters from other women you deceived. Women who are gathering, who are sharing their stories. Pause. You can't buy all of us, Mr. Voss. Voss's charm drops, cold underneath. I gave you an easy path. Don't choose the hard one. Silas steps forward, rifle still ready. Get off my land, now. Voss looks between them, calculates, realizes they will not break. This is a mistake, he says. You'll both regret this. He picks up the documents, pockets the money, walks to his horse, mounts. Before riding off, Sam, she'll drag you down. She's trouble. Always will be. You had 15 years of peace up here. Don't let her take that. Silas does not respond. Voss rides off. They stand on the porch, watch him disappear into the trees. Silence. Do you think he'll come back? She asks. No, Silas says. Men like Voss don't come back when there's no advantage left. He'll cut his losses and disappear. Pause. You did well, he says. I was afraid. I know. You stood firm anyway. He turns to her. You talked about your name, your real name. Wren Merrick. Yes. Not Ashford anymore. She shakes her head. No more running. No more hiding. He looks at her for a long moment. Then come inside, Wren Merrick, he says. It's cold. They go inside. The weeks after Voss's visit settle into a rhythm neither of them names but both recognize. Winter deepens, then breaks. The mountain cycles through February's hard cold into March's uncertain thaw. Silas works the fence lines. Wren writes letters, receives letters, builds correspondence with women she will never meet. but who share the particular geometry of her escape. By early summer, the inquiries into Voss's agency have moved from territorial authorities to federal attention. The Henderson matter has gone silent, whether from Whitfield's intervention or simple legal exhaustion. She does not know and has stopped checking. The guest room's framing waits through summer and into fall, not from lack of will, from the understanding that some things cannot be rushed. It is late autumn, nearly a year since she arrived, when the first letter from Esther Flynn appears. Tobias brings them up in a sack now, from women across territories: Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Nevada, California. All variations of the same story. Forged letters, agency fees. Arrive to find nothing or arrive to find worse. Some asking for advice, some sharing evidence. One from Esther Flynn, age 26. Denver, asking if she can come to the cabin. Mr. Voss knows where I am. I have nowhere else to go. I understand if you cannot help. But if you can offer even temporary shelter, I will work. I will not be a burden. She reads the letter to Silas. She's afraid, she says, like I was afraid. Silas is quiet. Cabin only has 2 rooms. I know. Pause. But the 3rd room is almost framed. You've been working on it. That wasn't meant to be a guest room, he says. That was stops. Was what? He looks at her. I was building it for you. I know, she says. And I'll use it. But Silas, maybe not just me. Pause. 15 years this cabin was closed. Just you. No one else. Maybe it's time to open it. Just a little. She pauses. Not forever. Just for people who need it. Just until they can stand on their own. Silas looks at the letter. At her. At the east wall where the framing is visible. He thinks about 15 years alone. Silence as protection. Cabin as fortress against the world. And then he thinks about her arriving in the storm. The fever vigil. Her hand on his. You're not alone anymore. That works both ways. The room needs to be finished properly, he says finally. Window floor heat. If we're going to invite people in, it needs to be right. She stares at him. We, she says. He looks at her. This is your cabin too. Has been for a while. You just haven't asked officially. Something breaks open in her face. Then I'm asking. Officially. And I'm saying yes. Officially. Not a proposal yet, but something close. Something foundational. Winter comes again. The second winter she has known on this mountain. But this one is different. The cabin holds 2 people now, with the practiced ease of a space that has learned its occupants. The guest room sits complete, its window curtained, its stove connected, waiting. They have worked on it together over the months. Silas cuts the window frame. She sands floorboards. Together they install the wood stove connection. She sews curtains, the first curtains in the cabin in 15 years. He builds a bed frame. She makes a mattress. No dialogue needed. Just work. The rhythm of building together. In early spring, March, by the calendar though, the mountain keeps its own time. Silas comes to the table with the seed packets. One evening, Silas is testing the window in the guest room. Opens and closes smooth. She is hanging curtains. I want to stay, she says, without looking at him. Silas stops testing the window. I know. Not as an arrangement, not as a practical solution to a problem that arrived at your door in a storm. She turns to face him. I want to stay because this place is better with me in it, and I'm better when I'm in it. Pause. And I think you are too. Silas sets down the window frame, walks to her, stands close, not touching, just present. I want you to stay, he says. Not as a solution, not as charity. Pause. I want you to stay because I've lived 15 years in this house alone. And now you're here. And for the first time since Margaret, it feels like home. Her eyes fill. Silas. There are still practical considerations, he says. There always are. Tobias will say something about propriety if we ask him. She almost laughs. Tobias forged your name and sent a woman up a mountain in January. I don't think his opinion on propriety carries full weight. Something happens at the corner of Silas's mouth, almost a smile. No, he says. I don't suppose it does. Pause. But, she looks at him. Cedar Fork has a church. It does. And a preacher. It does. And you know every trail down to it. Every one. In any weather. She folds her hands. Then there are no real obstacles. Only the question of whether we're ready. He is quiet. I've been ready longer than I let myself know, he says. Most unguarded thing he has ever said. She looks at her folded hands. So have I, she says. Though I arrived here with the strong impression that I was looking for entirely different things. What were you looking for? Safety. A roof that was mine. Work that wasn't conditional on someone else's goodwill. Pause. I found all of that. And it turns out, when you find what you were looking for, it only shows you what you hadn't thought to look for yet. He looks at her for a long moment. He goes to the shelf, takes down the seed packets, all of them. Carrots, beans, perennial columbine. Sets them on the table between them. 6 weeks, he says. That's what you said. That's when the ground will be ready. About 6 weeks? Yes. That's enough time, he says, to arrange things properly. If you want them arranged properly. She looks at the seeds on the table. I want them arranged properly. He picks up the perennial packet, turns it over. Columbine last, he says. After the carrots. After the carrots, she agrees. He sets the packet back, sits, picks up the ranch log, resumes his notes from the morning. She picks up her pen, goes back to the weather ledger. The stove burns steady. The creek moves through its early spring voice outside. They work in the quiet of two people who have said the necessary things and do not need to say them again. And on the table between them, seeds waiting for the right time. 15 months after she first climbed the South Trail in a January storm, Wren Merrick stands in Cedar Fork's small church and becomes Wren Thorne. The wedding is on the 14th of April, 1885. She wears the dark blue wool dress mended twice on the journey out. The best she has, better than it has any right to be after everything it has been through. Silas wears the coat he keeps for rare occasions when Cedar Fork requires something other than work clothes. Tobias stands beside Silas at the front of the small church, managing for the duration of the ceremony to maintain an expression that is something between dignity and what a man looks like when he has spent years hoping for a thing and is now watching it happen and cannot entirely believe the arithmetic of it. Martha Croft sits in the third pew and weeps without the slightest self-consciousness, which is, Wren thinks, one of the kindest things she has ever witnessed. Nora Brennan sits beside John Murphy and his 3 children. The youngest has fallen asleep against Nora's arm by the time the vows start and has been left there, and Nora has not moved. And Murphy has looked at his youngest child, asleep on this woman who is not yet his wife, but is becoming everything necessary. And his face has done something private and complete that Wren sees from across the aisle and is glad for. The preacher is a small man with a large voice who has been performing ceremonies in Cedar Fork for 11 years and has developed the specific skill of saying exactly what a ceremony requires without saying anything extra. He says the words. Silas and Wren say theirs. When it is done, Silas looks at her, not the way she has seen men look at new brides in the few weddings she has attended in her years of service. The performance of ownership, the public claiming. He looks at her the way he looks at everything he considers important, steadily, completely, with his full attention and nothing held back. She looks back at him the same way. Outside, Cedar Fork is having an ordinary April morning. Wagon traffic on the main street. The general store open, its sign swinging in the light spring wind. The mountains above the valley still white at the peaks, but showing bare rock lower down the long, slow revelation of ground that has been waiting under snow since October. They drive back up the mountain in the late afternoon. The east room is complete. Window with curtains the first in 15 years. Door painted white. Her study, where she will write to Margaret Daly in Denver, where she will correspond with lawyers and newspapers and other women. The guest room stands ready, where Esther Flynn will stay in 2 weeks, where 2 other women will stay briefly over the summer. When the cabin comes into view through the trees, Silas pulls up the wagon. They sit and look at it together. It's different, she says. Yes. Not just the room. No, he says. Not just the room. They go inside. The stove is warm. Nora has kept it while they were gone. Has left coffee ready and a note saying she has gone down to the Murphy place and will return tomorrow. The cabin is theirs for the evening. Wren stands in her study, the original east room hers now, and looks out the window at the angle Silas adjusted. South and slightly west. Afternoon light falling exactly as she described it. Low and steady and the color of something that stays. Silas comes to stand beside her. You got it right, she says. You told me what you wanted. I told you and you listened. He looks out the window, down the slope to where the garden strip is already showing the first evidence of the work they have done. The soil turned. The rows marked. The carrot seeds in and waiting. The columbine goes in next week, he says. If the temperature holds, it'll hold. She looks at the garden and the mountain and the long light afternoon and the man standing beside her in a room that is not yet familiar but is already unmistakably theirs. Silas. Yes. Thank you. He looks at her. For what? For building this. For staying. For letting me stay. He takes her hand. You're not a guest here, Wren. You haven't been for a long time. She holds his hand. They stand in the window light and look at the mountain that brought them together, and the cabin that is learning to be a home, and the future that is waiting under dark soil for the right season to bloom. Spring 1886. The scene returns to where it began. The garden plot. The seeds in Silas's hand. The hesitation. But now we understand what we are seeing. Silas kneels with the columbine packet. The ground is ready. Has been ready for days. And still he pauses. Not from doubt. From the weight of what this means. For 15 years he has not planted anything that requires more than one season to bloom. Has not planted anything that requires him to believe he will still be here, tending this same ground when the flowers finally come. Perennials are a commitment, an act of faith, a declaration that you are building a future and not just surviving a present. He looks at the cabin, the smoke from the chimney, the lamp in the window. Even in daylight they're signal to each other. The sound of a horse approaching. He looks up. His face softens. Wren rides in from Cedar Fork, dismounts, joins him at the garden's edge. She has been to town for supplies, for letters, for the weekly trip that has become part of their rhythm. She kneels beside him, sees the seeds in his hand. You haven't planted them yet, she says. I was thinking, he says. About what? Long pause. He looks at the cabin at the south window where afternoon light falls. Maggie liked perennials, he says. She said they were more honest than annuals. They don't promise what they can't keep. First time he has mentioned Margaret naturally, without pain. Wren stays quiet, lets him continue. I never planted them, he says. Because to plant something that takes years to bloom, you have to believe you'll be there to see it. And for 15 years, I didn't believe that. Wren's eyes fill. She understands. And now, she asks. He looks at her her hands reaching for his. Now, he says, looks at the seeds. I think I believe. He pours seeds into her palm. They plant together, hands in soil, working in the rhythm they have developed over the year. After a moment, she speaks. Esther wrote, she says. She got the teaching position. Starts in the fall. Silas smiles, small, genuine. They finish planting. Stand. Brush soil from their hands. Look at the cabin together. Smoke from the chimney. Lamp lit in the window. Garden rows orderly. The east room with its curtains. The guest room ready for the next woman who needs it. Do you think they'll survive another winter? Silas asks, looking at the columbine beds. Wren takes his hand. They're perennials, Silas. Once they take root, they stay. He looks at her, understands the metaphor, squeezes her hand. Yes, he says. They do. They walk back to the cabin. The camera stays on the garden, on the newly planted columbine beds. Wind rustles through. A few late snow flurries the last of winter. But underneath the soil is dark and rich and ready. seeds underground already beginning. The old-timers in Cedar Fork will tell you if you find them on the right evening that Silas Thorne came back to the living in the winter of 1884. They will tell you a woman arrived on his mountain by mistake and did not leave by choice. They do not know the inside of it. The inside was not dramatic. It did not happen all at once. It was not a declaration or a rescue or a transformation that announced itself. It was a lamp lit at the same time every evening. It was two people writing in the same ledger, their handwriting side by side on the same page. It was the sound of a creek finding its voice again in March, after 3 months of silence, and the smell of turned soil in May, and a woman planting columbine that would not bloom until next year, and a man measuring a window so the light would fall at the right angle for someone who was finally genuinely there. It was small. It was sufficient. The mountain kept its records the way it always had in stone and snow, and the slow, patient pressure of seasons. It had kept the record of a man who came to it with a grief too large to live with anywhere smaller. It had kept him through 15 winters and 15 springs and the long accumulated weight of all those days. And then it kept something else, a lamp in a window, lit every evening, still lit. The columbine first bloomed in the summer of 1887. Silas and Wren Thorne still live on that mountain. Their cabin has been temporary shelter for 23 women over the next 12 years. The seeds took root. The flowers came. And two people who arrived at each other by accident learned that sometimes the wrong mountain is exactly where you were meant to be all along. The lamp still burns. The mountain still holds. And in the garden, blue columbine blooms every summer, faithful and true the way perennials do when they are planted with care and tended with love and given time enough to become what they were always going to be.